Welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Smells Like Human Spirit podcast. It's episode 50 to be exact. I'm your host, Guy Evans, bringing you the show as ever from New York. So thank you very much to everyone out there listening, whether you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, smellslikehumanspirit.com, however you guys get this thing. It really is appreciated. Thank you for the continued support. It definitely means a lot. It's Thursday afternoon here. I just finished wrapping a very, very interesting talk with Aaron Franz, the researcher, filmmaker, author, whose work, of course, covers a number of different topics. But for the purpose of this interview, we decided to hone in on transhumanism, and you'll hear us also go into the overpopulation myth. We talked about the technological singularity, which James and I discussed in episode 43, I believe, of the podcast. So you can go back and check that out on smellslikehumanspirit.com if this topic really interests you, which I think it will after hearing this talk. Great interview. Really loved having Aaron on the show, and we'll definitely have him on again. Before we get to that, just a couple of quick announcements. I just want to reiterate, if you guys do use iTunes, please try to leave a rating and a comment for the show. It really helps in the search algorithms. Don't ask me to break down exactly how that works. This is just what I've been told. But if you do have a moment, see if you can do that for us. It definitely helps. Next, I would also like to have a segment on this show where I go through listener feedback, because it's got to the point now where we get quite a lot of feedback at the email address, which is smellslikehumanspirit@gmail.com. And at one point in the podcast, we were bringing up feedback on the air, and it just got to the point where quite a lot was coming in, and perhaps we weren't as organized as we should be. But whatever the case may be, I'd definitely like to move back in that direction, and perhaps even have a regular segment at the end of every show where I can address your feedback on air. So it could just be, well wishes, comments, suggestions, critiques, whatever you want. Definitely let me know how you came across the podcast and what you like about it. And if you have any suggestions for future topics or guests, then include them in your message as well. So it smellslikehumanspirit@gmail.com. You can also do all the above at the Facebook group. It's facebook.com/smellslikehumanspirit. So that's a couple of ways that you guys can support us. Another way, and I don't believe that I mentioned this on the show before, is that you can make a donation through PayPal to help contribute towards the costs of running the website and the podcast. If you go to smellslikehumanspirit.com, just click on the link that says support us, which is towards the right hand side of the top bar, and it's very easy from there, and there's no minimum limit really. Whatever you have definitely helps. And so if you're someone who really digs the podcast and you really like what we're doing and the direction that we're going in, hey, maybe you want to just support in that way as well and contribute to the podcast in that way. So with all that being said, again, episode 50 is here. Really appreciate the growing number of listeners and support for this podcast. Here is Aaron Franz talking about transhumanism. I'll see you guys again for the next show, and peace. Okay, so we're here with Aaron Franz. He's an author, filmmaker, and researcher whose work covers a number of subjects, including in particular the technological singularity and transhumanism. He's perhaps best known for his documentary, The Age of Transitions, his website of the same name, theageoftransitions.com, and his book, Revolve, Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood. So, Aaron, thank you for taking the time to be on the show, and how are you doing today?
Very good, and thank you as well, Guy, for having me.
No problem at all. I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion. I want to start by honing in on what you describe as your sort of area of expertise, transhumanism. And, many people see this as a new idea, a post-millennial concept. And indeed, in your documentary, The Age of Transitions, you outline how this wave of thinking has accelerated in the last decade plus, particularly since 9/11. However, in the same documentary, you forge a link between what's now called transhumanism and the eugenics movements of the 20th century, and you argue that this is simply the manifestation of an old idea but repackaged. So I say all that to say, let's start here. Take us through, if you would, the history of this concept and the history of the desire to create a new man.
Sure. Well, yeah, as you said, the link between eugenics and transhumanism is there. It's something that is denied vehemently by folks who are advocating the new modern form of transhumanism, that being the use of high technologies and development of those, like artificial intelligence, nanotech, biotechnologies, even life extension therapies, things like this, robotics, all that sort of stuff. So the modern day transhumanists are advocating those as the way for humanity to evolve to even a new type of human being, to become something else, because by integrating these technologies and by making biological alterations of the human being, changing our DNA and things like that, will be, obviously that would make a different creature. So, and a better one, more, well, the thing I like to point out with this is sort of the concept of intelligent design. I like to use that terminology because it has a decidedly religious connotation to it,
right?
But it fits in perfectly here. It's intelligent design. It's man's intelligence.
Yes, it's almost like man playing God, isn't it? You could argue.
Exactly. The truth of the matter is that it does, yes, indeed, have links to eugenics, even though that is denied. But it goes even further back than that. Again, if you're talking about philosophically, this desire to be more than human, to go beyond the limits of material and biological limitations, that's an ancient thing. And transhumanists now they make no bones about that. And we're like, oh yeah, this has always been a yearning of man's, and now we're just at a point in scientifically, through the scientific method, we built up enough technology that, well, now we may actually be able to do this sort of intelligent design where we willfully change the human species in ways that we feel would be advantageous.
So let's break down eugenics for people who may be unfamiliar with that term. What is that idea all about, eugenics? Eugenics,
okay. So if you dissect the term, it's eu, which is good, and then genetic, genesis is origins. So good origins. Good origins being, well, again, you could, to make this religious, you could think about Genesis as it relates to the Bible, and that's a whole other conversation too. But anyway,
yeah, we'll save that for another day, maybe.
Save that for later.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's about basically good breeding. That's what it comes down to. So the idea, there were a couple different practices back in around the 1920s is when this idea of eugenics got big, and it was actually advocated in universities. It wasn't very mainstream, even with the new science of biology, which is kind of a burgeoning thing too, and genetics specifically was really thriving, coming of age, I don't know how you'd say, at that time, and most of the geneticists at the time were also advocating eugenics. Eugenics was basically the way to put their scientific theories into practice for the good, for a social good.
Right.
That was the idea. So and then you get the idea of social Darwinism. That's basically the same thing, really. It's just applying this idea of, okay, survival of the fittest. We got to make sure that the best types are breeding, and therefore they will be able to survive and be the strongest. And if you're selectively picking only the best to breed with each other, and then kind of cutting off everybody else from doing so, then it only follows that you will get some sort of superior master race, that sort of deal.
Right. So it's just kind of like a misapplication of the biological principles of natural selection, isn't it? That's really, social Darwinism. Right.
Yeah.
And obviously, what comes to mind with many people will be, Nazi Germany and the blonde hair and blue eyes and all that stuff. So I find it very interesting in your documentary that you make a link between transhumanism and these eugenics movements. When I hear the concept of, post-humanity, all this stuff, technological singularity and all this, when I hear people endorsing a post-human world, it reminds me of, when you encounter people that will say things like, oh, the future will be awesome, robots will do all the work for us,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of, in just my opinion, it's this lack of recognition that, okay, things may be better. I use that term loosely, but who is benefiting from these so-called advancements? It's not going to be ordinary working people. Just going off history alone, there's a huge risk that this technological convergence could go horribly wrong at the hands of, the self-proclaimed elite. Would you agree with, my sentiment on that?
Yes, I do. And that's, I kind of recognized that right away when I came across the new version of transhumanism. I forget what year it would have been, but it must have been like 2004 or 5. I was just going through Wikipedia and I came across a transhumanism page, and I saw that they were into life extension particularly. I looked at it, I'm like, uh-oh, because there was there's a natural dialectic. Actually.
Everything okay there, by the way?
Yeah, everything's okay. I'm here in California where earthquakes happen, but it's not actually what that was.
Fingers crossed that's not what it was.
Yeah. Okay, so they're into life extension, but there's also this popular meme out there that, the overpopulation thing, which they've been pushing for a number of decades at this time. So, that's kind of an idea. I recognize that as a meme that's to be consumed by the bulk of the population and just taken for granted. The idea that overpopulation is real, there's too many of us. Okay, so naturally we have to do something about it. Okay, so we have that idea. And then we have the concept of life extension. Well, if the two were to meet, if we did have some way of extending life, and especially if these therapies were given out to the bulk of the population, which transhumanists say they want to have happen. They want everybody to have free access to this. Well, then, the overpopulation thing would only be increasingly said to be a problem. It would actually be a problem at that point, I would think. I mean, if you're able to live forever. And the thing with this, with the life extension therapies, the guys who are promoting this are saying that not only are you just going to live longer, but you'll be able to reverse aging so that you are physically like a young person. You are healthy in that sort of way. So without saying, you would be able to reproduce, and then, indefinitely, basically, I would assume.
So you mentioned the people kind of pushing these ideas and just saying how great they're going to be for humanity. Who are some of the key players that are out there currently really pushing this idea?
Yeah. Well, of course, there's Ray Kurzweil. He's probably the number one guy out there. You also have a number of transhumanists that are lesser known, but extremely interesting group of people. You've got the World Transhumanist Association, formerly. Now they're called H+, Humanity Plus. They go by that name now. And you may have seen their videos. They actually do fictional, kind of like Hollywood-style mini-series. I haven't actually watched those either, but H+ puts them out there on YouTube. I don't know. I got to watch those so I can critique them.
Yeah, we'll have to check those out. Sounds interesting.
Yeah, sure it is. And there's another group called the IEET, Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. That's the same group as the World Transhumanist Association, same group of people. And when you take a look at all those folks individually, like what do you call it? The members of, it's not a board, but I don't know, the people who are involved in that, they're very interesting people. So and a lot of them, some of them are experts in the fields of artificial intelligence and other technologies and things like that. And the ones who have worked on high profile or big projects with all sorts of like governmental agencies and things like that. So definitely some, power players, I guess you could call them. They're quite a number of them involved in this.
Absolutely. Overpopulation, you mentioned it earlier. It's one of those terms we hear a lot these days, and it seems like people use that term to explain everything from unemployment to poverty to, traffic issues. I mean, it's one of those catch-all terms. Oh, there's too many people on the planet. That's what the problem is. So I'm going to ask you, could you sort of outline your argument for why overpopulation is a myth?
Well, the first aspect of it that I don't like is just the misanthropic aspect, in that it turns people against each other, and it even turns them against themselves in thinking that that they're just this horrible burden on the planet itself. It ties into the whole promotion of sort of these overhyped ecological concerns. Not that ecological concerns aren't of a concern, but a lot of them out there are being pushed more for political ends than they are for legitimately cleaning up the environment. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that your listeners are well aware of this. So this ties in, and we've just seen all sorts of it's mainly fiction, really. We see fictional accounts of in films and TV where they'll either just quickly make a reference to, oh yeah, there's too many people, or look, these bears are dying because there's too many humans, and it's always like a very loose connection. It never goes into detail as to how those two things connect to each other. It's always just like, well, there's too many of us, so the planet's dying. The idea that we're a cancer on the earth, I think I've heard that 100 times now. I don't know. It's just I don't see how that's sort of it's not even self-deprecation. It's misanthropy, where we literally are turning ourselves into our own enemies. So it's just a bad attitude more than anything else.
Yeah, it's really quite shocking, and it's something to see when there are people out there that are saying, look, we're bad, us human beings, we're doomed, and we need, there's too many of us, and we need to restrict people's ability to reproduce, and we need to, restrict I mean, it's just, I don't know if it's a lack of self-esteem. I don't know if it's, that we're told we're not worthy or something. It's very strange. And speaking of strange, there's this bizarre and very creepy history, and you go into this in the documentary, of people in control looking at ways to remove or tame, as you say in the documentary, the pesky sexual impulse in human beings. And, this sounds like a very strange concept to many. So let me ask you, what evidence can you provide the listeners that this has been a real desire of those in power, for a long time now, and historically?
Yes, no, it definitely sounds science fiction-y, and it's bizarre. But the piece that I referenced in particular in the documentary would be Charles Galton Darwin's The Next Million Years. Mm-hmm. And this guy, of course, was direct descendant of Charles Darwin and Francis Galton.
Right.
Darwin, we know. Galton would be the guy who came up with the idea of eugenics. Okay, so that was before the turn of the century. He came up with the idea. He promoted it. He was a big figurehead of the beginning of the eugenics movement. So he comes from that area, and he himself, was into eugenics. And he was a member of all this big eugenics societies and winning the awards at the time. And he wrote that book, The Next Million Years, where he laid out a lot of very extreme ideas, eugenic ideas and ideals. One of them being, well, we need to get rid of the sexual instinct in people because, and he lists off a bunch of reasons for it. One of them, so that people will be happy. They won't be frustrated anymore. So they can live contented, celibate lives, I think is the line that he says. So,
wow.
So, yeah.
He obviously didn't get much action then. We know that.
I don't know.
We know that for certain. I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself.
That's all right.
So, I mean, how much of this whole movement do you think can be attributed to just sheer arrogance, and how much of it is about social control. And there was this clip again in the documentary where Nick Bostrom, I believe he's an Oxford professor, if I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
He makes this statement in his PowerPoint presentation that, death is a big problem, and I nearly fell out of my seat hearing that. And it made me think, have we completely lost our sense of perspective? It's not enough just to be one of many life forms and let life take its course organically. We have to always try to control everything. What do you think about that type of sentiment, that the biggest problem in the world is death, when we all live and die? I mean, that's life.
Yeah. Well, I had the same reaction as you did to that. It's just like, you can sell an idea any way that you can conceive of, and it's all about the sales pitch. And you don't sell anything without making people think that you need the thing, or that there's some problem to be solved by this. In this case, the thing being sold would be the idea of transhumanism, everything a transhumanism is. And the problem, oddly enough, is, well, death in this case. But death is just a symptom of being alive, being a human being. The real problem to the transhumanists is humanity. And they frame this in a whole bunch of interesting and disturbing ways. And, just look at their stuff and you'll come across many examples of this. But it's always the same thing. It's always that, human beings aren't good enough. They're too slow. They die. They're weak. They're dumb. They're stupid, And funny enough, this ties in to that same rhetoric we were talking to earlier with the ecological stuff, where we're a cancer on the planet and humans are bad. It's kind of the same thing, really. You see, like, we're getting all these, being hit by all these different angles, all saying that, humanity isn't good, and, it's the old thing, and it could be better and it could be improved. But it's beyond that. It's the number one problem on Earth, so why don't we get rid of it? And one way to get rid of it would be to create this transhuman to post-human creature that would be a better steward of the Earth.
It's really crazy stuff. But you listen to someone like Ray Kurzweil, and he just matter-of-factly says, in the next 10 to 15 years, this is going to become increasingly a reality. And we had James Corbett on our podcast, and he talked about the Global Future 2045 conference and things like this, where there's actually a time frame on when these things are going to be introduced. Is that just science fiction, or do you think it's realistic that the next 15, 20 years, a lot of these things could start to really pervade our lives?
Yeah, well, they do love to make their little time frames, make their predictions. 2030, 2045, they're always saying that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think that quite a number of things will be burgeoning. Certainly, we're already seeing a few of these technologies come into being. Certainly, artificial intelligence now is a very real thing. And that's one of the areas I like to point out too, is artificial intelligence is being used pretty extensively now, but we're not even hearing about the ways in which it is being used. There's this idea of narrow artificial intelligence and then artificial general intelligence. Artificial general intelligence is the fancy sci-fi thing where, you get HAL 9000 or whatever, Johnny 5, the robots that are smart and interacting and self-aware and sentient beings. Then the narrow AI is just, you create a system that's able to take huge data sets and make some kind of connections in those sets of data. And there's tons of these programs out there. There's also a lot of, the agent-based social simulations where they simulate the world in some way. Like it depends on how much data they got on how many different things, but basically they run simulations of the world. There's a lot of explanation there, but they're running simulations, and it's with AI. They're also creating surveillance systems that are AI based. You got the EU's Project Indect. some other ones. So AI is a very real thing. But in terms of the more dramatic technologies, I think they're on their way, and we're already starting to integrate technology now, kind of starting with the whole cell phone thing, and just going bit by bit. It's not going to be all at once. We're going bit by bit with it.
What about the role of phasing out humans in terms of in warfare? There's been a lot of talk about the Obama's use of drones, and before him Bush, but Obama's clearly accelerated the program, and we read a lot of stuff about the soldier of the future is going to be this kind of man machine weird hybrid. How much does that concern you that this is again going to be used for nefarious purposes, and we're going to have maybe even police on our streets that may not even be human beings?
Yeah, well, a lot of the development of these transhuman technologies is being done by military means. They're the military industrial complex, and that's just how it is. Like with nearly all of those technologies, that's where that's the genesis of them. Again, if we want to get into genesis, but certainly they're working on all sorts of different military applications now, and you've got the drones, you've got other ones that are just remotely controlled, and a lot of these machines that have been built for military purposes are actually quite famous now because of YouTube. They're posted on YouTube. You got the robotic dog that carries the equipment. That's been viewed millions of times. All sorts of DARPA projects. DARPA actually has a YouTube channel too, so that has a lot of those sorts of things on there, like the fancy robotics where it's either like a humanoid robot running or something like that, or the dog. But less sort of fantastical projects are on there too, but are equally disturbing with like drone technology and things like that. So I don't know. These things are being done. It's coming. And again, if you want to see the role that fiction plays, or we're seeing these things in movies like the G.I. Joe movies and stuff like that. It's just kind of showing these ideas to kids and familiarizing them with that. So it's not going to be much of a big deal when it does arrive to the folks who are watching those things.
Right. It's already going to seem familiar, isn't it? It's not going to be like a rapid change because we're like taking these tiptoe steps in that direction anyway. So let's turn the argument on its head a little bit. What's the most compelling argument that you've heard? And I know you've traveled to conferences on these issues and things of that nature, and clearly you've done a ton of research, not just for the documentary, but for the book as well. What's the most compelling argument you've heard in support of transhumanism that has made you stop and think and possibly concede that, okay, there may be some positives to it, or do you think that those things don't exist?
No, they definitely do. And I know where transhumanists are coming from, certainly. It sounds like a good idea. I mean, making just the idea of life extension itself, I'm not opposed to that at all. Just like finding a way to live a little longer healthily and be healthy a little longer, that's fine. But when it comes to the dramatic things, the integrating technologies into biology, things like that, I just don't see how it could be anything but problematic. And certainly things like privacy go out the window here. I'm trying to think of the best argument for transhumanism. I know that quite a few times I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. I get how it's good. And there's some transhumanists, especially at the lower level, who are legitimately, doing things for the right reasons. But I also know that there are a few guys in there that I wouldn't trust, just even from meeting people. But I mean, that's how power structures go in anything. So we can't really blame transhumanism specifically for having a bunch of evil people in there.
Right.
to be quite frank.
Right.
Best. Hold on. I'm trying to come up with the number one best thing. I have difficulty ever with like one like singling things out, but let's just say, suffice it to say, I understand where it's coming from. I get it. But the issues that need to be dealt with first are so many. There's so many of them that like we can't even get to a spot where like we're really integrating any of that stuff. I don't know. It's it's going to take a real long time to get there, to say the least. Just due to the state of the world now. That's really one of the worst things is we're not dealing with what's actually happening now. We're not analyzing the world as it actually is. We're just kind of idealizing everything, idealizing what the future will be, idealizing what our world is now. I think we're kind of prone to doing that. People don't like dealing with problems. So I just think it's more of the same really with transhumanism as everything else. We're just not dealing with what we need to deal with.
That's an excellent point. I'm wondering, have you come across the argument that, I've heard they've done some tests where apparently, this seems dubious to me, but apparently the human body has accepted, artificial, materials, and it's kind of accepted it into its. Do you know what I'm talking about or no?
Yeah, I've heard several things like this where different implants certainly have been taken. Yeah.
Right. I mean, what is your opinion on that? Because that seems, number one, like I say, very dubious to me. And, number two, okay, if we're being told that's the case, again, that's not a justification to move forward with this, but what do you think?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to the neurochips, the brain chips specifically, that's what they're really working on developing too, is one that where the chip itself gets surrounded by genetic material and the two kind of fuse so that they become one instrument, really. So, and I do know that different neurochips have been developed in abundance. So there are a number of them. When it comes to specifically, like, has tissue wrapped around the chip in the way that they want it to, how far along are they? I don't know exactly. But I do know that there has been massive amounts of research for decades and decades. Big area researching this is the Office of Naval Research. So again, a military development there. I know that organization's been big on the neurochips, and you got Jose Delgado, and he was working with them, and he had I'm trying to think. You actually have private companies working on this stuff too, though. That there's just tons. There are so many projects going on out there that one person can't even keep up with them. But I think people would be surprised to know how much work has actually been done already. It's really amazing.
One of the aspects, again, of the documentary, which I found really fascinating, was where you argue that this social Darwinism, as you mentioned before, is reinforced in popular culture, and you show as examples some of the reality contest shows and things like that. Would you mind just sort of going into why you feel that's the case? Because again, I would suggest most people out there, these shows are just harmless entertainment. At least they would characterize them that way. So yeah, could you sort of go into that for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of the shows that are popular now are just, they're kind of presented as friendly competition, which to an extent, I guess they are. But then it's it's a little bit more than that. And certainly with a show like Survivor or something, even just the language used in the titles and things like that, it's speaking to you at a subconscious level, if nothing else. It's telling you that, look, we're all kind of pitted against each other. We're all, fighting for resources, like on that show, and it's funny how just the themes in that show, a little group of people fighting to survive, to be number one, and number one is the only thing that counts too, and that's another thing in those shows, that you have to win, otherwise you're a loser, and whatever. But the way that those themes kind of mix in with other stuff that we're hearing from other areas, just I don't know. I probably connect the dots too much. This is something I like to do.
well, I have to admit that just on the surface, the whole structure of these programs, where you have these hopeful people trying to quote unquote make it, and they have to be judged by the all-seeing and all-knowing panel of three judges or whatever. I mean, just on that level, it's quite unsettling because it's like the idea that you always need confirmation or evaluation before you can deem yourself to be successful. And if someone in a position of power thinks that you're not good enough, well, by default, you're just not good enough.
Yes.
And it's like I can't watch those things, I'll be honest with you,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it really, yeah, it's just very sort of unsettling and a bit depressing as well.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's totally true. So it kind of sets the stage for especially young people watching these to accept the idea of peer pressure and sort of fall into that. Like if I'm not being accepted by others,
Yeah.
especially people in authority, then I'm nothing. Yeah, what am I? I need that acceptance. It's certainly not promoting like independence, like real sort of off the wall, unique thinking and acting. That's the kind of stuff that I've always been into myself, off the wall, weird, unique stuff. So
Yeah, well, it's just at odds with where everything's going, with the internet and things like that. I mean, you have the ability to carve out for yourself a career, whether you're like a musician or a videographer, whatever the case may be. Because of the internet, we have the means to gain an audience and gain a following without approval. So it's interesting that the things that are the most popular shows still reinforce this old paradigm of the authority figure and what they say is the be all and end all. It's like quite the sort of contrast.
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and you'll find that you get in contact with people that can help you out to do new things online too. So there's a lot of good aspects going on with technology. So there we go. I guess maybe back to that thing before, what's the best thing that transhumanism has to offer is, well, just technology itself is helping us connect to each other in
Right.
new and exciting ways that are, I've had excellent results with it myself. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think it's important that you just noted it there, really, that we're not saying that technology is bad. We're not saying that let's not keep pushing forward. It's just there is a line, I think. And when we're talking about, dramatically altering our own species and basically making ourselves redundant, I mean, don't we think we should sort of stop and pause there?
Yeah.
So just building on this last point in terms of popular culture, one of the things that we've discussed on this podcast many times is the advertising culture and the status anxiety it can cause in people. Again, I can't watch commercials anymore. I have to just mute them. To be honest with you, it's just I find them very irritating because it's like I've already invested my time to watch the show. I don't want to be sold things that I don't need. I just want to watch the show. But do you think there is a real link there between the amount of messages that we're assaulted with on a daily basis and our self-esteem as people?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, as you're saying, it's hard to keep track of how many different areas we're being hit from, telling us that, yeah, we're not good enough, we need more. Oh, but maybe we would be almost good enough if we got this thing, if we bought this thing, if we used this product, if we made ourselves look this way, if we, exercised a million hours a day, this, that, and the other, blah, 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 blah. All that really leads perfectly into the whole transhumanist vision. It leads up to the transhumanist sales pitch because, okay, you've been sold all these things before that made you better, but you're still lacking something inside, aren't you? You still don't feel complete. You still don't feel good enough, do you? Because, well, the secret there is that you're never going to feel good enough if you're always chasing after those silly things. They're never going to actually solve any problems for you. Right. But you're not going to hear that from them. What you're just going to hear the ultimate sales pitch, same thing again, where, okay, you yourself, biologically, a human being, that's old stuff. It's not cool anymore. You need to improve yourself genetically, biologically. You don't not only have to like wear these fancy clothes or like use the Google glasses, blah, 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 blah. You have to alter your biology to become something better. And then we're going to be getting somewhere. So it's all the same thing in my mind. It's just a natural progression. And absolutely, that's very good that you pointed that out. Well done.
Well, I just think that, again, this is something we've discussed in previous episodes, that we just get survey after survey telling us that people feel less happy than ever before. And we live in an era where we have more things than previous generations, yet somehow they were more content with their life. And I just think that the fact that it's very hard in this world to find a place of tranquility, to find a place of serenity, particularly if you live in a city. But even if you don't, I mean, just with how pervasive, television and other forms of media are, and the 24-hour news cycle, it's like, I think a big function of these things is to keep us, unstable and to keep us on edge. And it really sort of breaks my heart when I sort of encounter people that have achieved quite a lot, but because they're judging themselves against an image, against a standard that's not even real, they sort of feel that they're a failure or they haven't done well enough. I think that's sort of quite upsetting.
Absolutely, yeah, and I've certainly seen plenty of examples of this in my personal life too. So I'm right there with you. We can all relate to this.
Right. So let's finish here, Aaron. I mean, first of all, I've really enjoyed speaking to you, and I think we'll absolutely have to do this again.
Good.
But I sort of want to give you the last word on this. At the end of the documentary, you say, life is sacred, free will is a gift, and humanity is worth saving. So for all of those people out there that think that we're doomed and we need to get behind a post-human movement, I'll let you take us out with the last word.
Okay, well, I'm one of those people who believes that free will is actually a real thing. Philosophically, there's no way to prove it. You could, it may be real, it may not be, blah, blah, blah. People will tell you there's no point in believing in free will because you can't absolutely prove it. So okay, there's the thing. There's kind of an issue we're dealing with there is absolutes. People need these absolutes, like things are this way, they are that way. All the while, they're missing the point where it's not about absolute truths and absolute realities even all the time. Well, caveat being that, yes, we live in a material world that has certain set of rules. However, the biggest thing in our existence is that we get to choose our own worldviews. We get to choose our lifestyles, the way we live. We have real freedom. We have the freedom to choose. And that, to me, is free will. And there's a lot of stuff out there trying to divert you from that. And when you're diverted from that, you're not living life to its fullest. You're not making your own life what it could be, what it should be, because it's all about you being able to do your own thing. Absolutely. Whatever that happens to be. I don't know.
Interesting stuff. So before we let you go, Aaron, where can people find out more about you and your work? And could you just sort of let us know if you've got any upcoming projects that are in the works?
Yes, well, absolutely. You definitely want to go to theageoftransitions.com. That's THE, ageoftransitions.com. That's my website. You can read articles, watch videos, and I do have a podcast there called Trans Resistor Radio. Subscribe to that, listen to a couple of them. I do have a book, Revolve Man's Scientific Rise to Godhood, and it expands really on the ideas that are in the Age of Transitions film. So I have that in ebook format and also paperback, so please check out the book. I'm very proud of that work. And I am also working on the Age of Transitions 2 documentary, and I'm a very busy man, so I have to say
sounds
that.
like him.
So I will... I really am working to get that done, but I've got like a million other things going on, so it's not going to be done as fast as it should be, but it will be done soon. And I am always putting stuff on theageoftransitions.com, so check it out.
All right. Aaron Franz, thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you.
Oh, thank you, Guy. It's been great.
Smell.